Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers, Election 2018, New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. I'm Fred Martino. A program note before we begin. We invited Republican Yvette Herrold to join us for forums and an interview, and we're still waiting to hear back with a convenient time. With early voting already underway, today we welcome Democratic candidate Xochitl Torres-Small. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Fred. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here today. You were with us during the primary election, and we're glad that you're back with us in this program today. Before I get into kind of the nitty-gritty of issues, this is your first run for elected office, and I know you've been traveling all over the state. Have your discussions with voters about issues and about their personal lives, how the issues affect them personally, affected your views at all since the last time we talked during the primary?
Absolutely. It's been inspiring to get to talk with people throughout New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District, which is such a huge district, and to really get energy from folks who are excited about our opportunity and about getting to work to achieve them. One of the biggest ways that it's influenced me is how excited people are to have someone who's willing to get to the table and problem solve. I think folks have been very frustrated with the climate, with what's happening in Washington, D.C., with the over-partisanship and the failure to really look at ideas rather than party labels.
You know, polls show that on many issues there is still enormous concern, and probably that gridlock that you're talking about is at the root of that, because some people may not see a lot of reasons for hope. On one issue in particular, healthcare, many people are still very deeply concerned. We find that this polls as still one of the biggest issues for people in New Mexico and really all across the country. As you know, Senators Udall and Heinrich have both had a change in position on this. They have announced support for single-payer health care, and a specific proposal, as you know, is Medicare for all under Senator Bernie Sanders. What is your stand on this?
So I don't support the current policy, and again, talking about issues and problem solving is really important, and that's why I'm grateful to be here today, and I wish we could have had a forum with my opponent to really clear the air about some of the misleading and frankly the lies that have been put out on TV when it comes to this. The Las Cruces Sun News wrote an editorial saying that there was misinformation in the ads about me when it comes to healthcare. Same with the Washington Post. I think they said it was 4 Pinocchios. And I think that's really frustrating because there are important problems to solve when it comes to healthcare. It's one of the biggest issues that I've heard about on the campaign trail. And this distraction and lies doesn't do any good.
Do you support single-payer healthcare? The idea of single payer, I mean, what we have in Canada, essentially, just to our north.
I don't support the current policy, and I think that we
have
a lot of work that we do.
The current policy, I know, is the Affordable Care Act. I'm talking about a change. So
I don't support the current proposal for Medicare for all.
Okay.
We have to make sure that what we're doing is first and foremost defending the policy that we have right now. I'm sorry, I should have made that very clear.
So making adjustments to the Affordable Care Act, do you see a way toward single-payer health care if adjustments are made to the Medicare for All plan that you right now don't support?
So what we have to do first, and I'm going to go back to this because this is so important, to make sure that we are defending the policy now that is covering more people than have ever been covered. But my opponent, for example, supports a plan that would have taken away the coverage for 50,000 people right here in this district. She also supports allowing plans on the market that don't cover pre-existing conditions. So that would affect 275,000 people right here in this district.
Okay, have you made a decision on whether you would support single-payer health care in some form?
I don't think that the plans that are out there right now establish a way to pay for it, which is a huge problem, or a way to make sure that we're having the quality and access to care that we need.
So you're open to it if the plans meet your requirements? Is that what you're saying?
Fred, I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth.
Let
me
ask, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so let me ask, what your position is. So
my position is that we have to make sure we're defending the policy that we have right now, that we are expanding affordable health care, and that we're making sure that there's access for everyone. And what that looks like is making sure that we have the right health care providers in our communities, which is a huge problem that hasn't been part of any discussion.
So you're saying that we could have access for everyone without doing single payer?
Absolutely. I think there are other countries that have access for everyone without doing single payer. And
is there a particular model, a particular country in mind that you have?
There are a lot of different models, and here's where I think we need to be able to talk about ideas without blaming people or closing down conversations. But what I want to make sure we do is that we have an affordable healthcare, both for our government and for people, that is accessible to everyone. And the first thing that we have to do is stabilize the insurance market that has been driven to, that they're trying to drive into unaffordability. And that's what I'm focused on. And I think anyone who wants to have this conversation should be willing to talk about how we can get that done, because it is one of the biggest issues for Southern New Mexico.
Well, and as you know, we could do an entire half hour just on healthcare, but we won't do that. If elected, you'll be the first woman to represent the 2nd District. And women's rights have, as you know, been a focal point, really, in this time in which we live. Really, in the entire last year with the Me Too movement, and specifically during the Kavanaugh confirmation battle. Thoughts on these issues?
I think it's another incredibly challenging issue that we are just failing on right now when it comes to having real conversations about vulnerable issues. But I am grateful for the people that I've spoken with, and specifically the women that I've spoken with this year. Just last weekend, I was talking with a Republican woman who is eager to support me and was frustrated with the way the hearings played out. I think it takes a lot of courage for women to come forward, and I've heard on the trail numerous stories from friends as well as strangers about experiences that they've had. I also think it takes a lot of courage to stand up against your party, and so I was impressed by Senator Flake and when he called for an investigation.
You know that there have been polls that have occurred following this confirmation battle that have shown that there are Republicans now who are just as excited about the November election as Democrats were. That an NPR poll showed that there was no longer really much of a gap between Republicans and Democrats. Do you think anything was done to cause this by Democrats or not?
Well, I think that we all bear fault for failing to work together. And that's one of the key reasons why I am running for Congress. But the other thing I would say about the polls is that what I'm seeing on the ground is real eagerness to work together, and a lot of support from Democrats, independents, and Republicans alike, who that's their main priority, and anyone who's willing to walk lockstep with anyone is not something they're interested in this year.
Okay. Lots of people are also very concerned about the environment. I know this is an issue for you. That's something that you have a background in as an attorney. A recent report indicated that climate change is moving faster, perhaps even than what was previously thought. And it's really always been a concern in our area with a limited water supply. If elected to Congress, what would be some of the key points in your environmental platform?
So having worked on water issues for my career and also living in the desert, I know how important it is to make sure that we are working to safeguard our water supply and also support our environment. It also matters because I'm someone who cares deeply about our public lands and the health of those lands. As a hunter, I know how important it is to have have healthy lands that support our wildlife. And so what we have to do when it comes to climate change is make sure that the energy that we're producing is produced responsibly as well as effectively. We need to make sure that we are working to address our impact on greenhouse gases, and we have to make sure that we're working internationally to make sure that's happening all around the world.
Yeah. You mentioned you're a hunter, and there's a television ad that is playing right now that a lot of people watching this interview right now, if they've been watching commercial TV, they may have seen it, that you're out in the desert with a gun. What kind of reaction are you getting about that, and how did you make the decision to do that ad?
Well, it was something I wanted to do to talk about connections that we have. Mm-hmm. And one of the most real connections that I have is to our public lands. And mm-hmm. we all have ways to enjoy those spaces. And so for me and my husband, one of those key ways is hunting. As I mentioned, it's one of the ways that connects me not only to the land, but to our wildlife. And I think it's also an opportunity to have conversations, again, with everyone. We want to break down silos and start conversations. And so I can't tell you how many folks have come up to me and said, what's your favorite hunting spot? And my response is, well, I'm a hunter, so I'm not going to tell you exactly where my favorite hunting spot is, but it's a great way to start a conversation. And I've had folks who aren't hunters come up to me and say, that was a different kind of ad, and it creates a conversation where we can start to look past these silos of who we think we are.
Mm-hmm. How'd the idea for the ad come about?
We were just talking about what are real things about me that connect me to the things I believe in. Mm-hmm. And so one of the key examples of that for me is being a hunter connects me to my love for public lands. And that's a big part, frankly, of why I'm running, because I have experience working to protect our public lands, the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks, and it's something I'm proud of as a New Mexican, is this land of enchantment that we have.
Okay. I want to ask you about another issue that's environmental, but it's also, it's really more than that. It's also about kind of a key public policy issue that affects infrastructure. So some folks, as you know, complain that the federal gas tax has not been increased in many, many years, and this starves our infrastructure. But it also, obviously, history shows could have an effect on the kinds of vehicles we drive, quite frankly. I mean, a gas tax increase would possibly move people to more efficient vehicles, which would cause less pollution, et cetera. Thoughts on this?
So infrastructure is vitally important, especially when it comes to rural places like southern New Mexico, when we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure that it takes to build our economy. I think a key example of that is in southeastern New Mexico right now, where there are fatalities every single week because of the high traffic in the area. We also need to be investing in our infrastructure of the 21st century, so making sure that people have access to good, reliable internet all across New Mexico, no matter where you live, and cell phone service, because it's hard to compete with other businesses when you don't have those same services. Mm-hmm.
Is the gas tax something that we should look at for funding that?
So I think we have to have mechanisms for funding, and you've talked about some of the challenges when it comes to making sure that we expand, we have the funding that we need to do this work, but also that as the use of gas may decrease with more efficient vehicles, we find other ways to fund this work. But frankly, what I want to make sure we're doing is investing in communities like southern New Mexico to make sure that we are keeping up with where we need to be.
Okay. How about public transportation? Some folks say that more federal funding should go in this direction, that we don't have enough funding for public transportation?
I think public transportation is another key part of infrastructure. When you have better public transportation systems, it helps everyone. We have to make sure that we're doing it responsibly, that we are doing it in places where there is high traffic, that we're doing it in places that will really help build the economy. And I think one of the key things for doing that is listening to and working with local economic development experts. I think that's a fundamental part of any economic development plan, is identifying what the needs are and working with the people who know the most about that.
Okay. As you know, one of the biggest challenges for New Mexico, in fact, it's the subject of some of the television ads that we're seeing right now on commercial television in the gubernatorial race, is education. We're near the bottom in some measures of educational achievement. How can the federal government help in this way? And if you're elected to Congress, what are the top things you would want to do?
So the federal government has a role when it comes to education. And I just have to tell you, there are so many conversations I've had with people about the importance of education. I talked with a man who actually ended up leaving his job so he could homeschool his kid because he had special needs that couldn't be addressed in the public schools. I've talked to people who are contemplating leaving New Mexico because they don't feel like their kids have access to quality education here. And so it is of vital importance that we make sure that no matter where you live, you have access to quality education. And the federal government supports that by doing things like investing in early childhood education and making sure that programs like Head Start are coordinated with the state early childhood programs so that we're leveraging our funds and reaching more children instead of competing over the same services. We also need to make sure that we're supporting students on the outside. So making sure that we have support for high school students to explore career readiness training, like good vocational programs and community colleges, as well as four-year universities. And I have experience doing that. When I worked for Senator Udall, we worked to connect students to other programs. We also worked to get funding into higher education to make sure that it was supporting things like STEM, supporting agricultural programs, and really strengthening the institutions that we have.
Okay. Well, certainly the next issue affects schools, but it really affects all of us, all of society, and that's gun safety legislation. It's failed time and time again, despite many tragic shootings in schools and elsewhere. Two measures that, as you know, have extremely broad support across the country include closing the so-called gun show loophole for background checks so that we have universal background checks for gun purchases. Another one that's very popular is to reinstitute a ban on assault weapons. What are your thoughts on these two proposals?
So I know that guns are a vital part of our heritage here in New Mexico. I know that personally because I grew up in a home with guns. I am a hunter myself, as we talked about. And one of the first serious conversations I remember having with my grandfather was about gun safety. Because each time I use a gun as a tool, I know that there's a checklist of things that you have to do to make sure you're keeping yourself safe and the people around you safe. And that's why I believe that the federal government should have the same thing. If you have a list of laws to keep us safe, there shouldn't be loopholes around that. And that's why I, like most gun owners, support background checks for all gun sales. Mm-hmm. I also, like most gun owners, support making sure that we have a judicial process to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people, like domestic violence perpetrators or people who've been deemed too dangerous to fly. So I think there are common sense gun measures that we can have and all work together on. And one of my frustrations is that we're not moving forward on these issues because we're trying to polarize the issue. I think if we could identify these issues, another one that we could do to protect our safety is investing in mental health. I've heard many Republicans talking about supporting mental health in our schools. That's something we should be doing right now.
Mm-hmm. How about reinstituting the ban on assault weapons?
So I think that we don't have the right players at the table right now to talk about this issue in an informed manner. We need to make sure that we are talking with public safety experts as well as people who know guns, as well as law enforcement, to really talk about what that would mean. Because I think a lot of folks don't understand that there isn't actually a collection of guns that are called assault weapons. It means having a list of definitions. And here's the problem. That conversation is taking time when we need to do something right now. So let's do the background checks. Let's do no fly, no buy. Let's focus on these things that we can get done right now. Let's focus on mental health in schools.
Okay. Another issue I know you're hearing a lot about as you travel all over the state, undoubtedly, is our economy. And New Mexico's median household income trails the national median by more than $10,000. It's one of only 6 states, by some reports, that did not experience a significant increase in median income over the past 5 years. How can the federal government help in this regard? What are the key things the federal government can do to help New Mexico begin to enjoy some of the resurgence that we're seeing in some other states, most notably even Colorado, right to our north, one of the most prosperous state economies, one of the best economies statewide in the country?
This is another thing that I'm hearing all across the 2nd Congressional District, and personally. My brother no longer lives in New Mexico. My best friend no longer lives in New Mexico because they had great opportunities outside of the state. And I can't tell you how many people I was I was talking to some folks in Tier C the other day about this and about how people shouldn't have to choose between their best opportunities and the home that they love. And the bartender said, "You're darn right." I mean, everybody gets that this is an issue. So we have to make sure that we are working to address that. And so I think that the way the federal government can help, the federal government doesn't make jobs, doesn't make the economy, but it creates a playing field so that people can make jobs grow. And the way we do that is we invest in a strong workforce by creating career readiness training and strong education. We make sure that we have right-sized regulations that create that level playing field so no one's taking advantage of a system, but also support small businesses that don't have the economies of scale to comply with some of the paperwork that can be involved. We also have to make sure that we're investing in our infrastructure. And so that means technology, infrastructure of the 21st century, as well as safe roads and bridges. And lastly, it's making sure that we're connected and listening to local economic development experts, because the best way to build an economy is to talk to people about what makes a space unique, and then building a marketplace around that.
Well, income security is certainly on the minds of our growing senior population. During the primary election, I know that you said that you support removing the earnings cap on the Social Security tax in order to ensure that benefits will not be cut in the future for some of our most vulnerable. If you could talk about that.
So Social Security and Medicare are key programs that people have paid into for their whole life to make sure that they are able to retire with dignity. And it's something that's very important for all of us. So I think we have to protect these programs, and there's a few ways that we have to do that. We have to be responsible with our spending. We have to make sure that what we do is protecting these programs. We have to lower the cost of healthcare, which impacts the solvency of the programs, and we're growing our economy so that we have more people paying in to these programs for their own future and ability to retire with dignity. We can also work and think about lifting the cap.
Okay. Believe it or not, I only have a few minutes left, and I don't want to leave this conversation today without giving you a chance to talk about your platform on immigration. This is an especially important issue for us in this community, and I know it's tied to border security as well, that those are two issues that you might want to talk about, both immigration and border security. So let's do it.
Well, I just appreciate you noting that this is an issue of special importance in our communities, because growing up on the border, I know how important it is to have both a strong and vibrant border. And that we are investing in our future. And so it's been frustrating to see people in Washington try to simplify the issue and really use it as a divisive point. With people, instead of really recognizing the complexity and the opportunities that we have here. So we have to, when it comes to border policy, we have to have a strong and smart as well as fair approach to our borders. And strong means that we do have to enforce our laws. It means we have to have a highly skilled and accountable law enforcement agencies that are enforcing those laws and keeping dangerous criminals like drug traffickers and human smugglers out. But it also means that has to be smart. So we have to make sure that we're using our resources wisely. When I worked for Senator Udall, it was right after the first wall was built. Now it's called a fence. But it's called a fence because they looked at each location on the ground and what was the right infrastructure for that space. So that's why we have a see-through barrier that's a pedestrian barrier in high traffic areas so that Border Patrol can see potential threats coming, approaching the border. That's why we have vehicular barriers elsewhere. And where we have a desert that takes 3 days to cross, we need the technology to identify where people are more than a physical barrier that only takes, 30 minutes or less to cross. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by smart. Mm-hmm. The other part about smart is making sure that we are investing in our ports of entry. Because that is a key part of our economy here in New Mexico as a net exporter. It's also a key part of maintaining our security. So if we have efficient ports of entry, it's important. Yeah. I want to make sure I get to immigration because I don't think that, I think that a fundamental piece of border security is a clear and moral immigration system. And so that means making sure that we are allowing people who want to follow our laws, who love our country, a process to do that, to be here. When 80% of the United States thinks that Dreamers should have a pathway to citizenship and Congress hasn't been able to do anything about it, that just shows how broken that system is. And so we have to make sure that we're also supporting our Dreamers as well as investing in work visas and skilled labor as well as family reunification. Because when we have a system that's clear and moral, it also allows us to build our economy and our community here.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Fred, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio every weekday. It's morning edition from 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org. We'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.